Hi, I'm Kai-Fu Lee of Sinovation Ventures. It's my pleasure today to talk to you about artificial intelligence, its growth, opportunities, and challenges, given how fast it's grown in the past. We're seeing that AI is making all kinds of headlines. We're seeing that AI has beaten the best human game players. AI has passed all kinds of exams. And AI has even been able to generate natural language in surprising intelligence. And finally, AI has conquered a 50-year-old biology grand challenge, protein folding. So how long will this continue? How many of human capabilities will AI be able to take over? Or will AI and human work with each other symbiotically? Well, let's first look at how AI can essentially replicate human hands and feet. And that's really robotics working. And we've seen traditional robotics have really robots on wheels that might say welcome, the pepper as a product, and products like that are kind of cute. But in the more recent 5 years, robotics have become real. Here are some examples you see. On the upper left is a soft robot hand that can pick up something like an egg yolk, even better than people. And then on the upper right is a giant robot that doesn't look like a robot because it's not humanoid, but it's really more like a laboratory. It's a fully automated, self-running laboratory that can be applied to something like COVID testing. And that can not only be safe because you don't have humans in the middle of laboratories playing with potentially toxic types of materials, and it's predictable. Humans make mistakes, robots like this kind don't. And also it works 24/7. So when you connect that to a scientist or to a iterative experiment, then you can do all kinds of experiments from a research end, or just test a bunch of patients on whether they have COVID or something else. So no longer will we need lab technicians. We'll have a much more effective, accurate, and lower cost mechanism to do that with robotics. The third example, lower left, is autonomous farming vehicles. These are harvesting cars that will drive in the farm and basically harvest apples, or oranges or any fruit. And of course, drones can do the seeding and then the fertilizing and then spreading the insecticide. So farming is very rapidly becoming autonomous. The lower right-hand side, we see a autonomous loading vehicle or a forklift. We all know that in big warehouses, whether it's Amazon warehouse or a warehouse of a large company, there are people who need to move boxes around for things that are needed as packages or to ship within the company. But actually that is very routine and repetitive work within a constrained environment, much easier than autonomous driving. So we have a number of companies that have already built very powerful, inexpensive, predictable, again 24/7 forklifts that work within the factory or the warehouse. Let's take a look at the second area where AI using computer vision is replacing human eyes. And humans can see things through our eyes. A lot of our input comes from our eyes. So with a computer, with AI, we can have computer vision as an algorithm that takes pixels as an input and recognizes objects. So the input would be potentially through a camera, but it could also be camera and sensors. So here again are 4 examples of AI working with cameras and sensors, able to do things equal or better than human eyes. On the upper left is an apparel factory that uses AI to check all the shirts that it makes to make sure the color's correct and the labels are correct, the sizes are correct. So it saves about 80% to 90% of the human cost. At this point, you still need a human to straighten out the shirt before it's inspected, but that can be automated later as well. On the upper right, we see an electronic factory where AI is being used to check on blemishes or imperfections or mistakes on a phone. On the lower left is a similar case, but we're examining something much bigger, namely motor assembly. Again, checking for errors there or problems or things that might cause a potential safety issue in the future. And then on the lower right, we see AI reading lung scan, whether it's for COVID or cancer. Machines can recognize objects, including tumors, much more accurately than people. So with these tasks, they're all somewhat unnatural for people to do. They're not things that we learn to do as we grow up. Also, they can wear out people's sight and vision. So it's wonderful that AI can do it more accurately and more cheaply and more reliably. The third example is using AI to replace human brains. So before you get all scared about what that's going to do to all of us, this is actually only a very small part of human brains, only repetitive routine tasks. A lot of our brain is still a mystery to us. So here are 4 examples. On the upper left is AI being used in automated trading. Of course, you know that a lot of the human trading is already replaced by automatic trading and quantitative trading. But that's really not AI running. It's still largely the human brains that drives most of the trading behavior. For example, you or your fund manager. But we are seeing now AI is able to absorb so much more data than people, so that it can make decisions that people probably don't have enough data to make. So I think increasingly secondary market trades will be taken over more and more by artificial intelligence. On the upper right, you see RPA, robotic process automation. And what that is a smart computer algorithm that's installed on someone's computer who's doing a lot of routine work. So it watches the worker on what the worker is doing. For example, if you're in the expense report department or the human resources department doing recruiting, you're probably replying routinely to people about their expense reports or about their job application. You're probably setting up payments for the payment processing or setting up interviews scheduling. All of that is very routine. So a AI algorithm, the RPA, can sit on your computer and watch your work for a while and start to figure out parts of your work that it can do. On the lower left, you see basically a chatbot that's able to help people who have COVID. And instead of having people help, you can now have a chatbot that can do 24/7, and that can also be trained from human transactions. And on the lower right, you see something that combines our brains and as well as eyes and our hands, which is autonomous driving. But autonomous driving, that is driving in a way that's as good as people on any road, well, that is really complex. So a lot of people view autonomous driving as one of the grand challenges in the next 5 to 10 years because it is a complex area. Not only do you have to see, you have to act, and you have to think, and you have to react, and you have to deal with complex issues such as how to get me from place A to place B safely, and safely for myself as well as all the pedestrians and other drivers I encounter, and also don't hurt the car. So these priorities are a lot more complex, and also you have to understand not only the rules of the road, but the pedestrian out there, whether he or she is likely to cross or actually headed home in the other direction. And observing and predicting human intention, that's again something more difficult. Now let's look at the 4 waves of AI. So we've already seen examples of all 4 waves. So as I described, AI requires a lot of data in order to work well. So naturally, the first wave is the internet wave. That is the Amazon, Alibaba, Google, Tencent of the world are able to collect a lot of data and use your internet application using your data and your own clicks as a way to learn to do things. So Amazon will show you more things that you click on, and it will get better because of it. The second wave is really over businesses that happen to have a lot of data. For example, Banks can use it for credit card fraud detection. Insurance company can use it to rate insurance applications, and all of that is trained based on outcome. So if you know which are the fraudulent transactions, you can detect fraud. If you know which users have defaulted, you can detect likely defaulters. So if you have a lot of data, whether it's in public policy or public sector or education or healthcare or retail, all of that can be aggregated and used to make smart predictions. The third wave is called perception. And we've given examples of computer vision and computer speech. So understanding your environment, the ability to hear and see and recognize and understand. So that's something a lot of AI can do now. We see that even our phone has cameras and it has sensors, it has microphones, you can talk to it, it can see. So we're seeing that deployed in more and more situations so that our homes will become smart, our cities will become smart as sensors are spread everywhere. You've probably heard the term IoT, Internet of Things, and these are effectively sensors spread everywhere. In the past, IoT didn't quite take off, but now you can collect all the data and use AI to process the data, make sense out of it, make smart decisions, and I think that will cause all flowers to bloom in the area of perception. The final area is autonomous AI, and we've also seen some examples: robots, autonomous vehicles, smart forklifts, and cars, and arms. So that will continue to expand further and able to really take over a lot of the blue collar work. So you can see that these four waves are really impacting the industries under the four waves, and they will mature. The more data, the better they get, and all four waves will improve over the next decade or two and able to do a lot of things for us. So that brings us to a key question, which is, as AI becomes more and more powerful, trained by more data, what type of jobs might AI displace? So as we described, AI is going to first displace the repetitive jobs, and that's probably within the next 5 years. Then it will replace the more routine jobs. And then it will go after the optimizing jobs. Jobs that don't require deep thinking, but just requires checking a radiology picture, an MRI or CT, and determining whether someone has cancer or not. So that would be an optimizing job. What remains safe are jobs that are really complex, that require strategy, analytical thinking, reasoning across domains, common sense, and then jobs that are creative, jobs that requires you to come up with new ideas that no one has ever had before. And when we think about the AI taking over some of the jobs and tasks, it's really not just the blue collar. Many people think, oh, the factory worker, the assembly line, those will go first. Oh yes, those jobs are endangered, but the white collar jobs are also potentially endangered. I gave the example of robotic process automation. You can imagine if an HR department starts using that and it's being used for collecting resumes, and once that works well, some people are replaced, it can go on to do email communication with the candidates, it can set up the interviews, it can coordinate the feedback, it can help facilitate decision making, and even do an offer negotiation once it understands a candidate. So once HR departments uses AI for recruiting, then it can think about using AI for training, for orientation, for performance evaluation. And when HR departments use more and more AI, then other departments like finance, legal, marketing, sales, customer service, they will follow. So AI displacement will not be immediate. It will take some time for it to find an entry into a company. But once it goes in, technologies will spread. So AI displacement is inevitable, it's gradual, and eventually it is also nearly total for the purpose of taking over routine work. So as we think about us and our next generations, many of our jobs will be potentially in danger. And also when we think about our children, also what are the hopes of their careers? how will they get educated? And if you have a 1-year-old, how do you envision their future? And what should they study? And how should the future of education be evolve? So to answer these questions, I think we should ask an important new question, which is what AI cannot do. And what I can tell you is that the AI, there are several things that AI cannot do. AI cannot create, conceptualize, or plan strategically. While AI is very good for optimizing a narrow objective, it's unable to pick out what objective that should be, or set its own goals or think creatively. So nor can AI have any common sense or think across complex domains. But the other key thing for us to realize is that AI also cannot feel or interact with empathy and compassion. That's something we believe is innate with human beings. So a robot trying to take care of an elderly person or making someone feel understood and cared for, that's not likely to be easy to do. And even if AI can kind of fake it, humans are unlikely to accept it. Also, as an additional point, AI cannot yet accomplish complex physical work that requires a high degree of dexterity or very precise hand-eye coordination and deal with unknown and unstructured spaces, especially ones that it hasn't seen before. So putting these, there are 3 dimensions here. Let's put the first 2 dimensions on the picture. We've seen the x-axis before, going from repetitive tasks all the way to creative tasks. And more to the right are the human, more to the left are for the AI to do. But we also talked about the second dimension, which is about empathy and compassion. So let's add that as a second axis, the y-axis. The lower part would mean there would need to be less of empathy and compassion. Higher would be more empathy and compassion. So we now have divided all the jobs and tasks into 4 quadrants. On the lower left ones, the low creative and the low compassion, of course, we would expect these to be done gradually by AI. Those are the jobs that we talked about replaced in the first parts of this talk. Those are really the only jobs seriously endangered. If we move to the lower right, these are maybe lower compassion required, but require a high degree of productivity, like a scientist. Well, that's actually an area where there's a great opportunity for human-AI symbiosis. That is, for AI to assist the scientist, for example, by proposing possible compounds, chemical compounds and proteins, and generating them in a generative chemistry using AI in terms of what are most likely to pass clinical trials and what are most likely to be effective for certain diseases. And then the human scientists will then select from those and do experiments. So it's really human AI working together. On the upper left are the most interesting examples because they are not necessarily the most creative jobs, but they require a lot of human touch and compassion and trust between humans and humans. So that's where one could potentially take AI as an analytical engine and really wrap the human warmth around it in these kinds of in these kinds of jobs. For example, the doctor's job will no longer be the doctor having to memorize and have an encyclopedic knowledge of everything about medicine, but rather doctor can rely on an analytical AI engine that can give very accurate diagnosis and prescription and treatment, but the doctor will use his or her warmth and care and touch and win the trust of the patient in order to come up with the best diagnosis, to tease out the patient's all the pre-existing conditions, family issues, and other issues, and get the patient to talk and to trust, and visit the patient at home, give the patient confidence that he or she will recover. And all these things will actually be very helpful to the patient, is actually quite lacking in our healthcare systems. But if the doctors can move from attempting to be AI and memorize all the new treatments and drugs going into more of a compassionate caregiver, letting AI do what it does best with numbers and data. That, I think, is a transformative impact on the physician profession. And the same can be extrapolated to teachers and many other jobs. So again, it's a great symbiosis of AI doing what it does best and letting people do what only people can do. And of course, on the upper right, with high creativity and compassion, that's where humans will excel. So there you have it. It's a blueprint of how humans and AI can and will work together. So while we're seeing increasingly AI can do more and more tasks, there are still many things that only humans can do. So let's move to the last topic. In light of the still significant challenges of AI displacement of jobs, or some would call technologically driven unemployment, what are the solutions for us and for our children? I outlined these in 3 categories. In order to survive and thrive in the AI economy, I would say we have to relearn, recalibrate, and build a new renaissance. So what do I mean by relearn? Relearn is the process for the people who are displaced from routine work to learn work that is not displaceable. So I think vocational schools need to redesign their curricula to consider the fact that auto mechanics are going to be needed less and less. Plumbers may be a little safer, but nurses will be a job that will increase a lot. So this reallocation needs to be made. The second area is recalibrate. I think a lot of jobs we really need to creatively think about how to recalibrate them. We need to make sure all the professionals are not just doing the same job they've been doing, but are able to learn AI-based tools. So that, as we discussed, AI-based scientists should use AI tools. AI-based medical scientists should use AI-based molecule generation programs. There will be AI tools being used in all kinds of places for people who are artists, who are writers, and the future doctors will need great AI diagnostic tools. The future of teachers will need to rely on AI for helping each student to get a customized education and an entertaining education by having one-on-one AI to student kind of customized teaching. But then the teacher will change the job into one where the teacher is more of a mentor to help the child to grow into someone that fits into the AI economy. So we also think there will be many new jobs that will be created. And we don't quite know what they are, but we should definitely be on the watch for what they can, for the opportunities that will arise. The last opportunities is the most fun. I call that Renaissance because it's really celebrating the human creativity, compassion, and humanity. Just like in the Italian cities that really the merchants funded the Renaissance, AI will create a phenomenal amount of wealth that can fund a new Renaissance. AI will inject interesting flexibility. People can perhaps work fewer hours, follow their passion, develop their talents, really go after and become the people they really want to be. And with more time, I think there will be people who could be part-time artists, sculptors, writers, photographers, and also educators, I think, freed from the drudgery of having to grade homework, which AI will do. The teachers will be able to unleash their energy to design lessons that encourage curiosity, creative thinking, and critical thinking. So this renaissance, I think, is the most exciting and the fun part. So lastly, just to conclude, I think we're definitely seeing AI making a huge impact in the society. AI will do routine jobs for us, and that means we have to figure out ways to transition people along, and also make sure that the people are aware they need to be looking at a new AI era where the most important skills are different than before. So to conclude on this talk, we anticipate AI will dramatically change the world. At first, it looks like AI will take away a lot of jobs and tasks. But when we analyze it, we actually see what AI can and will do is take away the routine jobs. And while even that places significant challenges, and for us to really have to think about the 3 R's on how to overcome the next 15 to 20 years where routine jobs are being taken away. But if we look a bit beyond that, beyond the 15 and 20 years, what we see is that AI will have truly liberated us from having to do routine work and really be able to focus on the exciting, the fun, the passionate things. And these, after all, are the reasons why we came to this earth. Thank you.